important topic. It's a growing concern, not only in Canada, but around the world. And I think having the knowledge, having the information is 90% of the battle when it comes to diseases like this, where you contract it, how you contract it, and what exactly it is. So you are going to learn about Lyme disease. You're going to hear about it somewhere. Perhaps maybe many of you already have, but it is definitely something that is becoming more frequent in our communities, and an awful lot of people know of somebody now who has been affected one way or the other by Lyme disease. Now, what is Lyme disease? The red square up there with that curly little thing, that is the bacteria, Borrelia, that causes Lyme disease. There's Borrelia burgdorferi, other Borrelia, Borrelia hermsii. We have quite a few in Canada, and that's part of the reason why Canadian tests, and maybe many of you have heard this, is that the current testing for Lyme disease is actually quite poor. It has a high false negative rate, and a lot of that is because it's too narrowly focused on only one strain of one of the Borrelia bacteria, but we have quite a broad range of them in Canada. So there's a lot of different researchers and whatnot looking on that and trying to find better ways to improve testing. There are better tests to be had, but you typically have to have your blood sent out of country to either the United States or Europe. As you see there, there is a very definite bird-tick relationship. People wonder, how are these ticks arriving and whatnot? Well, our friendly little robins and sparrows and finches that arrive in the spring also bring with them a lot of infected ticks. Upwards to about 250 million ticks are brought into Canada every year on our migratory birds. And because of that, there is no good measurement of being able to tell where the next case of Lyme is going to be, because it's spread randomly by the migratory birds. So the migratory birds carry it in their blood. They infect new young larval or nymph ticks that jump aboard and start to feed on the bird. So they're going to pick up the disease from the blood of the bird in many cases. They're going to arrive in your favorite park or field or perhaps even in your backyard, and the ticks are going to fall off, and if the mice and whatnot are in your area are their next meal, you're going to start slowly building an infected area of Lyme disease. And then new ticks that feed on those mice, and if you just happen to be the next one on their desired menu, then you potentially contract Lyme disease. Now, luckily, and I say this in loose terms, the Okanagan Valley still has a relatively low number of the ticks that transmit Lyme disease to humans. It's the Ixodes species that transmit the tick to humans. The dermacenter tick, which is more commonly called the wood tick, the Ixodes is the deer tick. The wood tick, the dermacenter, is a larger tick. It does not transmit Lyme disease to humans. There's a very odd chance it might on a very odd occasion, but that would be very, very unlikely. The dermacenter tick, although it doesn't transmit Lyme disease, it does harbor other illnesses. And you may have read in the paper over the last few years that there's been kids with tick paralysis and whatnot, and they have to search the body until they find the tick and then remove it, and then the paralysis goes away. So that's from the dermacenter tick, the more common wood tick that probably people are more familiar with. But over the last few years, the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation has been working with various veterinarians up and down the valley who have been collecting ticks off of the family pets and whatnot. And as a result of that, we are now starting to find more and more of the Ixodes tick that are transmitting Lyme disease. Okay, next. Maybe you could back up a sec there. These are all Ixodes ticks. That's the larval that's right from the egg. and then that's the nymphal tick. And this here actually is the stage of life of the tick that is most likely to infect humans. So as you can see, it's pretty darn tiny. So an awful lot of people have no idea they've even had one on. This is an adult male, and that's an adult female. So it's...
Is it like if they get on you, is it like an itch or like a bite, or any notice anything like that?
Well, they're highly evolved, these little ticks. What they've developed over the years is they'll climb and find a spot on you where they want to feed. And they're not terribly selective. They'll go almost anywhere. And they will, very first, they'll inoculate you with a freezing. So you don't know that they're there. And then the next thing they do is they'll put their mouth parts through, find the blood source, but before they start their actual feeding process, the next thing they do is secrete a cement, a bonding cement under that first layer of skin attached to their mouth part. So that now you can't feel them, and if you accidentally roll over in bed or just scratch something because you feel a sensation, they're not going to be easily taken off because they're cemented. And quite often, those people who take ticks out, you'll notice a chunk of white that comes with the tick, and everybody thinks that's part of their skin. That's actually the bonding cement. Lyme disease isn't a new disease. I don't know if any of you saw the National Geographic TV show or read the article in last year's National Geographic. That 5,000-year-old Iceman that they did an autopsy on that made many of the TV shows. The only bacteria they were able to identify in it was the Lyme disease bacteria. So it's not new. It's been here around a long time. Now here's a bit of the history of Lyme disease. Again, it's not new. They only just started recognizing it in the mid-70s. It actually started with a family, a group of women in a town called Lyme, Connecticut. In the United States, where they started noticing that so many of their children were getting diagnosed in their community with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And so they banded together and started going to the medical professionals, boards and whatnot, to demand some answers. It was just too high a rate. And as a result of that investigation, they identified they were all infected with this spirochetal bacteria. They didn't know what it was exactly. It wasn't identified specifically as a species and whatnot until 1992 by Dr. Willy Bergdorfer. But as you see, it's been in Canada for quite a number of years. And these are only the few cases that were actually recognized. There was a lot more than that, but they just weren't being detected. There was no testing, there was no awareness, there was no nothing.
EM? What is that?
Oh, yeah, sorry, EM rash. That's erythema migrans. It's the name for a type of skin rash that is common. And you may have heard that everybody gets the bullseye rash or that sort of thing from Lyme disease. In reality, that's been way overblown according to the current research. Actually, very few species or strains of the Lyme bacteria will cause a rash of any kind. So it's not as big a hallmark. Those who get the nice big bullseye rash are the lucky minority, because hopefully now most physicians will recognize that. That's not the case, as we have quite a lot of evidence of. They're still not getting it, but hopefully over time they will. As I mentioned, this is the dermis center, and the reason I put this up is to give some perspective as to the sizes of the ticks. What's on the person's thumb over there is that tiny little nymph of the deer tick. So it's not very big and easy to miss. But you'll notice it's a darker tick too. It's smaller and it's darker. That's the more identifying features of the deer tick. You'll notice on the female, which is the one you're going to see most frequently, The adult female at the top there has her dark area behind her head, whereas the dermacenter, larger tick, their area is tan behind their head and larger. It just gives a good balance as to the size of the tick, and they're really quite tiny. This is some statistics out of the World Health Organization that was published during those years, listed there. As you'll notice, Canada's not even on the mark. Like, it doesn't show up. And it's because despite the efforts, I mean, the first Lyme Disease Society in British Columbia was formed in 1989 by Diane Kindry, a registered nurse from the Squamish family from North Vancouver, Squamish area, and who contracted Lyme, and her father happened to be Dr. Kindry of Squamish, BC, who was able to diagnose her and started recognizing that he had more in his own practice that he had been wondering what the heck's going on with them that turned out to be Lyme disease. So he joined up with the head of the BC Centre for Disease Control at the time, Dr. Banerjee. So he and Dr. Banerjee went slothing through the woods and everywhere throughout BC and started collecting ticks and mice and looking for Lyme disease. Pretty well everywhere they looked in the late 80s and early 90s, they found Lyme disease in BC. And that was reported in the 1994 BC Medical Journal. But clearly a lot of doctors do not read their medical journals because patients are still to this day being told throughout BC we don't have Lyme in British Columbia. They're being told that by their physicians. However, Lyme disease has been here. So the societies were founded. Pressure was being put on the medical leadership to do something. They held a national meeting in 1991 and chose to do nothing. That was their modus operandi. As a consequence, nothing was ever recorded, so we have no good data. And only after a lot of pressure did they finally start making it a nationally reported disease in 2010. But it's still very sporadic and inconsistent in its reporting. So as you see, Canada doesn't even show up. If you look at a world map of Lyme disease, Canada's just blank. So we're doing our best to try and change that. Now this is in memory of Dr. Kindry. He was the one who also diagnosed me in the early 90s with Lyme disease. I got sick for a number of years before I was diagnosed, and I got very sick. I couldn't walk. I drooled when I talked. My brain had left me. I was 38 years old and got in my car one day. My wife found me sitting out there half an hour later. I had no idea I had to put the key in the ignition to start it. So, of course, I thought I was in the full throes of dementia at that young age. It was pretty frightening. But when the doctors gave up on me, and they took my lymph nodes out and sent them away for testing and everything, and my lymph nodes came back as normal functioning lymph nodes fighting an infection of unknown origin. And then finally the doctors started to tell me, well, we think it's all in your head. And I said, well, I have a pretty amazing brain if I'm controlling my lymph nodes and everything and creating infection in my body. So obviously they just gave up on me. So my wife went to the Kelowna Library and started reading books on chronic disease. She found a book a woman had written about Lyme disease, and it was just a blueprint of everything I had just been through. And in there was a picture of the rash I had had 4 or 5 years earlier. And that's when it all connected the dots. But having that knowledge didn't help me with the regular medical system getting any more help. They just rejected the whole notion that it was Lyme disease. In the back of the book, there was the name of the New York Lyme Borreliosis Society, so we called them, asked them if they knew of anybody in Western Canada or United States who was doing anything on Lyme disease, and they gave me the name of Dr. Kindry in Squamish. So I got his name on a Friday afternoon. I was sitting in his office Monday morning. I walked out late Monday afternoon with a clinical diagnosis of Lyme disease and a prescription for antibiotics. I got a little sicker for about 4 or 5 days. no improvement, and then between either the third or fourth, or the fourth and fifth week, it was just amazing. It was like a rebirth. My brain came back, my legs came back, my speech came back, I didn't choke on my food. It was incredible. So obviously I have a great deal of consideration for Dr. Kindry and for Dr. Banerjee for the work they did in the field trying to educate people. They, along with Diane Kindry, created a half-hour documentary that showed several times on the Knowledge Network throughout BC, because I remember seeing it, called More Than a Tick. And it was Dr. Kindry, Dr. Banerjee, and others going on about Lyme disease in BC. But after they retired in around 1997, they both retired within a year of each other, all of that information sort of just got discarded at the BC CDC and elsewhere. So again, the doctors weren't getting that information. But this is where Lyme disease has been found now, confirmed throughout BC. So it's here. And getting the knowledge and understanding where it thrives, where it lives, what you should do is part of the thing. Okay, next. Symptoms. Well, it's a multi-system disease. So it can affect just about every system of the body and the function of every system of the body. So there's quite a list there. Some of the more common denominators of Lyme disease with most people are this overwhelming fatigue that sets in. And then some people get muscle pain, some people get joint pain. Not too often are you going to have somebody who's got an awful lot of joint pain with an equal amount of muscle pain. So it's going to be one or the other, more the fibromyalgia type with the muscle pain, or the arthritic type with the joint pain. But also a lot of people, and we now know this is strain and species related, get no joint or very little muscle pain. They just have a lot of other neurological problems, similar to multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's or many other conditions. So as you see, that's quite a list. And as a result of that, this is why it's called the great mimic, or the master mimic, Lyme disease, because we know a significant number of Canadians are walking around currently with other diagnoses, but in fact it's Lyme disease. You may have remembered all of the hype a couple of years ago when there was this new treatment for multiple sclerosis called the CCSVI treatment, where the veins were clogged and collapsing and whatnot. And also there was quite a furor that they couldn't get help here in Canada. They weren't allowed to do the treatment at the beginning here. So a lot of Canadians with multiple sclerosis went over to Europe to get this treatment done. When they arrived in Europe, much to their surprise, they wouldn't do it without giving them a thorough Lyme disease evaluation, because Lyme disease over in Europe is very common, and it's identical to MS. You can't really distinguish the two, right from the brain lesions through to all of the symptomatology. So anyhow, a lot of these people found out by going to Europe that they in fact had Lyme disease all these years, not multiple sclerosis. So we don't know how many of the 100,000 people in Canada with multiple sclerosis right now actually have Lyme disease. We don't know how many of the people with Parkinson's actually have Lyme disease. We don't know how many of the people with arthritis, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all of these other labels, various psychiatric disorders. We don't know if it's actually Lyme disease. And currently, government isn't doing anything to help answer those questions. We are light years ahead of where we were even a decade ago with our ability to use new methods of detection, such as genomics and proteomics. We understand the DNA sequencing of most of these organisms right now, so that we can use this system of next-gen sequencing to take tissue from somebody and analyze it and find out everything that's in that tissue. Currently, right now, our tests are a very poor screening test. And I had one Genome Canada funded researcher give me a good analogy, and I'll relate it here. He said the tests we have right now are running a reasonably powered magnet over a great big haystack looking for the needle. So you're going to only be lucky if you hit it. He says, but now with our knowledge of genomics and proteomics, and with the computer strength that we have now, he says, not only will I be able to tell you where that needle in the haystack is, I'll be able to tell you, identify every piece of straw in the haystack and every microorganism on every piece of straw in the haystack. So that really caught my attention with that explanation, because that's amazing. So now we, our foundation, are working with these people and are hoping to set up research facilities where the proper live subject and post-mortem research is going to be done. The 2010 Public Health Survey pointed out that we've got 2 million people in Canada with these diagnoses of unknown origin, like MS and chronic fatigue. Alzheimer's is another one. Dr. Judith McCloskey, who was on my founding board of directors, I found her, when I started CanLyme, the first thing I did was go to our universities and look for people who were doing anything in Lyme disease. So I found Dr. George Chaconis at the University of Calgary. I didn't even know we had a Canadian research chair for the molecular biology of Lyme disease, but there he was at University of Calgary. Dr. Ruben Kaufman has been studying the Ixodes ticks for most of his career at the University of Alberta. Dr. Banerjee, by that time, had retired from the UBC. So I invited all these people to join my board, and they all jumped at the opportunity to join the board right away. So we had a good science evidence-based founding board. Dr. Murakami, one of the treating physicians in Hope, BC, joined the board. Dr. Kalivas, an infectious disease doctor from Quebec, was on the founding board. So we really tried to emphasize the science right early on. So now that we're working with the Genome Canada funded researchers, although it's not going as quickly as we'd like, in 10 years' time from now, or even 5 years' time from now, I hope to be able to go and talk to groups like this and say, this is how the testing was developed. And this is why we now know, out of that 2 million people that are diagnosed with these diseases of unknown origin, this is why so many of them now have had their label relabeled as Lyme disease, chronic borreliosis.
You mentioned we don't have a decent test, but in Europe, they are testing people regularly. Do they have a better test?
They employ much better. Canada, in all its wisdom, pretty well gives itself away to the United States Center for Disease Control. So whatever they do, we just blindly follow. The United States Center for Disease Control, back in 1994, set a testing serology criteria. It was developed and it had the bar set quite high, so it was going to miss a lot of cases. But it was only ever designed for surveillance. So you don't need that level of accuracy. And it's right still to this day on their website that it was designed for surveillance, not for diagnosis. Well, the Infectious Disease Society of America decided, well, heck, we'll just grab that and say now it's our diagnostic standard. And that's what they did, and Canada, in all its wisdom, just adopted that, and despite the many, many complaints from the patients groups at the time and their experts with them. And we've been fighting that ever since. But that's what they're using. They're using a serology, a blood test. All it's doing is looking for antibodies that your body has created against the Lyme disease bacteria. It's wrought with problems. There's tons of research showing that it is not a good test, but that is what you get here. And you're reassured when you walk out of the doctor's office all too often, don't worry, you don't have Lyme disease, your test was negative. Well, unfortunately, that's the majority of cases of people who actually do have Lyme disease. So it's a significant problem and hopefully something that's going to be changed in the near future. So we've got a bit onto the testing, and as I said, the biggest problem with testing in Canada is the multiple strains of the bacteria that we have here and the fact that we're only testing for one strain of one species. It'll pick up perhaps some strains that are close on the genetic scale to them, but any of those species and strains that are further away on the genetic code, there's not a chance our test is going to be picking them up. And yet we know it's been published by Health Canada and by John Scott, a researcher in Ontario, that we in fact have multiple species and strains of the bacteria that come. So what is the treatment? Well, at any stage, this disease is treatable. Not everybody's going to recover to the same extent. So clearly, having the knowledge of what to do very early on, because this is very treatable in the early stages. If doctors are taught to recognize that a person comes in late June with the flu, and nobody else in the community is getting the flu, don't call it the flu. Investigate further because it's probably Lyme disease or one of the other tick-borne illnesses, or of course then you have to rule out West Nile virus, but don't automatically think it's the flu and send the individual home, which is what is occurring far too frequently. And so that's the first thing. If you get a flu, start feeling crappy outside of flu season, your antenna should go up, that it's not really just the common flu. It's something else going on. And if it's treated, clinically diagnosed, I would like to see where it got to the point where the doctors will say, well, it's out of season for the flu, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, so let's treat it like a duck and see if it helps. So if we could just get doctors to go back to the way they used to do medicine 40 years ago, is making their best judgment call using their 7 years of medical education and going with it. If we just started treating more and more of these people, you're going to save an awful lot of chronic disability. That 2 million population of people in Canada with chronic disease are also the biggest users of our healthcare system because they are sick and they don't feel good. So they want help. And so they're always looking through the system.
If I could add something just to what you're saying, in Manitoba, at the present time, from what I know, if you've been in the bush and you think you might have been in contact with the tick, or you're not really sure, the doctor will treat you automatically for Lyme disease right away, without any blood.
In some areas of Quebec.
No, Manitoba.
Or Manitoba, sorry. In some areas of Manitoba. We still have a lot of resistance in Manitoba in certain areas. Unfortunately, the biggest areas are still very resistant, and there are groups there that we're pushing. In fact, there was a very good symposium put on last year for doctors. One of our board members is Dr. Redwin Muckbell, the head of immunology at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Manitoba. He was able to orchestrate a very good seminar for doctors there. So they're slowly getting the information. We still haven't seen yet a lot of evidence of that knowledge trickling down into their day-to-day practice, but there are signs of it, that it's now starting to take seed and it's growing. And that's usually the process with this sort of thing. It takes a lot of that sowing the seed before anything takes. It's a very big, slow, old machine, very well controlled on who's going to publish what, in what text, and unfortunately, it's usually all the wrong people making those decisions. And so another big effort of the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation is to persuade our politicians to insist that we and our experts are allowed at the policy-making level for those diseases that affect our life. Right now, we're just excluded. Oh, you're just a patient. You have no right to be at this table. So you're just going to have to live with the consequences of what we decide. Well, they've screwed it up for the last 30 years here in Canada, so we want a position. We have experts on 4 continents. We work within our own universities. We have a great deal to offer, and we can solve this a heck of a lot quicker than the machine is doing right now.
So one thing that I keep telling people to do is if you're not comfortable with your doctor's diagnosis or condition medication and it's not going anywhere, question what he's doing and how he's doing it.
Right,
And
yes.
never just accept what a doctor is saying as being God's truth.
Exactly.
Because it just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't, but in all fairness, it's getting tougher to question your doctors because, as we all know, it's hard to get a doctor in many areas now. And so people are feeling less and less willing to confront their doctors on these issues. And there's fewer and fewer doctors, not in numbers, but there's just more sick people. And there's a whole lot of people who are sick using the system. So it's, again, we got to get back to good medicine to reduce and increase our ability to detect some of these illnesses so that we can reduce the backup times, the waiting lists, the wait room lists and numbers sitting in waiting rooms around Canada waiting to get in to see their doctors. I think part of what has been allowed to take place over the last 30 years is as much a part of the problem of why it's hard to get a doctor right now and why healthcare is so costly. It's the way medicine has been doled out over the last 30 years. It's no longer patient-based, it's all managed care. And so they're not as interested any longer in getting at the cure of a problem, they just want to manage it. We can invent a new drug, we can implant this or do that. There's all kinds of ways for them to make money off of sick people. And unfortunately, it's that mentality that's been running our system for too long right now. And we're hoping to change that. Okay, next.
Sorry, I have a question about landscape design. What, could you explain?
Oh, right, yes. Okay, on prevention, yeah, we should do that. Of course, awareness, for starters. Where do the ticks like to live? Well, they like moist, shady, grassy areas, typically. So around lakes, any of our lakes, and they found the Lyme ticks around the Okanagan Lake and some of our lakes at other elevations and whatnot. Any area where it's well treed, especially with deciduous trees, less with the Lyme tick in areas where the pine trees are and whatnot. But they like tall grass, brushy areas, anywhere, any brush, 18 inches high or grass 18 inches high is enough shade to keep the ground underneath it typically moist enough for the ticks to survive. When they get hungry, they just climb up that 18-inch brush or thing, and they put their little claws out there, and as soon as they smell your breath, your CO2 coming, they'll just be like that, waiting for you to brush up against that piece of grass. They'll grasp on and then climb and feed. And so it's, they're a very hardy little bunch too, these ticks. John Scott, the researcher in Ontario, had his tick survive for over a decade with no food, nothing. So they're a very hardy bunch. They've been put through the laundry, the dryer, everything. They survive. So when you're outside, just be aware if you're walking on paths, if you're out hiking, stay off of the grassy areas, stay in the middle of the path. away from the brushy edges of the path. Wear long pants, wear your socks over top of your pants, tucked in. Try and reduce the areas where the ticks can easily get at your skin. And then it's a good idea to spray those areas where the sock is over top of the pants, around the rim. Spray that with DEET all around there too. And then your waistline, spray it with DEET. And your neckline and any exposed skin, spray it with DEET.
I got a thing here. Last summer, I was working out. I put my shirt and coat stuff on a stump.
Yeah.
And after I put them back on, I ended up with a couple of ticks. They were totally black.
Yeah, it's right in the ear tick.
How long after you're bitten do symptoms show up?
It's very varied. It's quite variable. There are people walking around as we speak with Lyme infections with no symptoms.
Why I ask this is, I've been about September, now beginning January, it feels like I have arthritis or something in my legs.
Right. Then take that information, that history, to your doctor and say, I want the BC test. You might get lucky and they might find it if it's Lyme disease. We don't know that yet. But look further. Have your blood sent to one of the labs in the United States that specializes in tick-borne disease, because they incorporate more than just one strain in there. And there's a lab in Northern California that is by far and away picking up most of the cases and is in terms of patient outcome is leading the pack. And they're the only lab that we're aware of in North America that uses a human-derived strain of the Lyme bacteria as the basis of its test, along with other tick-derived strains that, like the BC test, is a tick-derived strain. And bacteria change their coat from when they're in a tick to when they're in a human. So we can't expect to be looking for antibodies that we're building to the coat the Borrelia bacteria is wearing when it's in the tick. We need to be looking for the coat the bacteria is wearing when it's in the human, because that's the human antibodies that we need. So we think that's a part of, from a microbiological perspective, we think that's a good part of the reason why the lab in Northern California is detecting more strains. So,
does that explain why there was that big spike in Austria, because they're using better testing? Or?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. That is such an odd spike that perhaps they have the bar set too low. Maybe they hit it right on and everybody else hasn't. But I know that people in Austria get treated very quickly. And as a result, they have much lower overall chronic disease in the country. So there's fewer MS and fewer, and it wasn't always that way. Now this is only information that I've acquired just from being at a couple of symposiums in Germany over the last few years, is that the Austrians are now starting to find that they're treating a lot of Lyme, but they've also now reducing all these other chronic illnesses. So maybe they've hit it right on. We won't know that till we've got the better genomic testing, because again, they're still only using serology, so it's an indirect test. We need to start finding better direct tests that are actually detecting the organism itself. And until we do that, you know, everything's sort of, we're not sure what's the real answer. Now, on landscape design there, University of Guelph offers a landscape program, a design program in Ontario. One of their professors there actually designed one of the courses all about how to landscape your property to reduce the chances of having ticks on your property. So it's relatively simple. It's just keeping that 2 to 3 foot edge rocked area between your actual yard and any of the treed space or the tall grass space or the brush space. So you landscape your yard so that there is that natural barrier between the tall grass and your lawn where you're going to be sitting out on your lawn chair. And that way there, the ticks, they aren't going to migrate when you're sitting in your lawn chair breathing all that wonderful CO2 that they love to smell. They're going to be stopped dead at that moat of gravel that you can put around your yard. So it's good that those tips can save lives and save chronic disease. So, but the DEET, body checks, you know, it's really important. It's a different world out there than it was 40, 50 years ago when we were just outside playing, having a ball. It's different now. There are these little nasties out there. So I think that's pretty much the conversation for today, and I think from what I'm going to do here is just open the floor to questions.
What's with the wallet cards?
Wallet cards, I have some of them right here on the table, actually. And actually, I'll add on to that right now. On there is also better ways to remove ticks, because you can actually inoculate yourself with the bacteria that's in the ticks if you don't remove it properly. So you want a pair of fine tip tweezers. That's what most people are going to have ready access to. A fine tip pair of tweezers, and you want to get right under the head of the tick where the mouth part is meeting the skin. You do not want to touch the body of the tick with anything, because they're so small and so fragile that it's very easy to compress the body of the tick. And as soon as you do that, you're just pressing whatever's in them into you, because they've got their needle poked right in you. So you don't want to inoculate yourself. And so you take a fine tip pair of tweezers, pinch it right at the skin, and then just pull backwards. And it can be sometimes quite a tug because they're cemented. So you just pull. And then you swab the area with some antiseptic. And keep the tick, put it in a Ziploc baggie with a tiny little piece of dampened paper towel, and either call CanLyme or take it to your local health center. But definitely always try to save the tick, because the identification of the tick is critical if you do start getting sick, especially.
Is it not true that if you use tweezers, you have to be very careful, because if you pull on it too far or the wrong way, the head detaches and keeps bearing?
That can happen with any method, but it's not that frequent, and it's also not that big a deal. You can usually pick that out, the mouth parts out pretty easily. But the mouth parts aren't where you're getting your Lyme from. The Lyme is actually coming from the midgut of the tick, and it migrates through the juices over time. See, the human blood and the midgut juices of the tick have to exchange for a while, so the enzymes are activated so that bacteria can change its coat to survive in the human blood. So that takes a little while.
About 30 years ago, I had somebody have a tick on his hand. And I remember others, in our group, their kids used to play in English too and stuff like that. And we were told to burn it.
Yeah.
Does that do the trick?
Well, no, that was not very good advice. What happens with humans and anything else, if we're burnt badly, like it doesn't take much to burn a little tick badly, we often defecate and vomit as humans. Well, so do bugs. So if you start smothering it with Vaseline or burning it or any other injurious type measure, you risk the defecation and vomit of the tick, which again is dangerous to you because there's a direct hole in your skin. So any bacteria in the feces or in the, of the gut of the tick and the vomit is going to go in you. So that's not what you want to do. You want to use the safest method is if you're close to a doctor's office, you can go in and they can do the intradermal method, which is just poking a little needle right under where the tick is feeding. They just put a little bubble of Novocaine there, and as soon as the tick realizes that he's no longer sucking blood, he just naturally backs right out. So that's another good one, but often you're not near enough. Yes?
In 1986, I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I endured horrific fatigue and all that rot. When I came from Port Moody, not far from a lot of Squamish, across the, and anyhow, I went to blood testing for Lyme disease. I had sent my blood to, I believe it was in California, and it came back. I, in fact, have Lyme disease. I have Borrelia. And they said 2 other strains of something that they'd have to further investigate. But I do have that bacteria in my blood, and I am currently on antibiotics. What was your treatment? How long is the treatment? What antibiotics were you on, or what antibiotics is?
Well, there's no magic. So I don't metabolize antibiotics necessarily the same way you do. I may have had a different strain of the bacteria than yourself. Well, there's Borrelia, yeah, but that's just the name of the genus. But there's all kinds of, they're all spirochetal, yeah. They're all spirochetal diseases, or bacteria. And they get that name from that spiral shape that you've seen at the beginning.
They send me back a thing that says you're 84%.
It depends on what test you have. Usually those don't really mean much. All it can tell you is you've been exposed. Yeah, the only test that a physician is going to be able to request through their standard forms that they have to fill out to have your blood tested is through the BC Centre for Disease Control. They will be the ones doing the screening test. And as I said earlier, it's only Borrelia burgdorferi strain B31 that they're testing. So they're not going to detect that you may have produced antibodies to any other of the strains in the genus of Borrelia that might be too far away from B31. So
the lab, the one that I went through was called the Western blot. So
the Western blot, you won't get that in BC unless you are positive or equivocal on the screening test, the ELISA. Even then it's questionable. They seem to rerun the screening test frequently for some reason, even when they get a positive or an equivocal.
So how do you get your blood sent to California? How do you go about that?
Well, you can contact CanLyme. Well, there's phone numbers for the different labs that we can give out.
Sherry Bird in town, she's in naturopathic.
Yes.
So there's naturopathic doctors go to it. There's one in Kelowna, and there's in
Well, there's Alanaberg in Kelowna. There's Bryn Bentham in Summerland. These are naturopaths. Since 2001, naturopaths have been allowed to prescribe antibiotics so long as they've written and passed their pharmacology exams. So we have a few throughout BC now who are diagnosing and treating Lyme disease and doing a very good job for the patients. Yes?
Under prevention, you mentioned clothing, and I've heard that it's better to be outdoors. Is it either light or dark clothing?
Light clothing is easier because it's easier to see the tick on your clothing then. So that's the reason for the light clothing, is simply that it's easier to see something crawling on you that is dark against the white or light clothing. Yes?
Since we're in Penticton, I thought I'd mention that we have a naturopath in Penticton who is treating Lyme disease.
Is that Sure, you're?
Oh,
hi.
I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself before.
Yes, so the naturopaths, like I say, have, unlike other provinces, we're relatively good, well off here, because now the naturopaths who aren't under the same clutches of the BC College of Physicians and Surgeons, who so rigidly want to own this disease, they can operate and function much as medical doctors could 40 years ago, but are no longer allowed to. Yes?
So there's one thing that I'm having trouble making sense of.
Yeah.
You made the point earlier that, and I totally accept this, that there are a lot of outfits, companies, that look for ways to make money from sick people.
Yes.
And I could point to outfits that produce insulin pumps.
Exactly.
There's a disease, there's a need, they make a product.
Right.
So if there's millions of people suffering from undiagnosed Lyme disease, that strikes me as a whale of a business opportunity for the medical device or medical test company. Now, the question is, why wouldn't they go into that space?
I can answer that.
Okay, why?
Because you can get cured with antibiotics and then you're
No, it's
finished.
the test you sell.
Well, you can get, it's not worth it to them probably. You can get cured and there's
Yeah, but you have to test
but
it
with
to cure
MS,
it.
There are a lot of people trying to come up with the magic test.
The test would be a business.
The test, there's a lot of people looking to develop the magic test, because you're right. The person who comes up with that gold mine test is going to make $1 trillion. Meanwhile, they're making trillions of dollars by what I call farming sickness, so that they can, and that's farming with an F, so that they can farm sickness with a PH.
Yes.
And so it's where, the looking for the cure isn't high on the list of a lot of the companies, but though there are a lot of people looking for the test, because that test is going to make somebody really rich. Yes?
Now, the name Lyme refers to Lyme genetically, for the disease was first detected in humans. The disease, to my knowledge, was found in farm livestock like cattle as early as the 1970s, so it's been around for a long time.
It has, and actually, if you read the literature in multiple sclerosis and other illnesses, this little spirochetal bacteria has been associated with MS way back. The earliest research that I read was 1911, where they were able to identify in all of their multiple sclerosis patients this spirochetal bacteria. They didn't know what it was, what it meant, or anything, but it was, yes?
Just a couple of questions. First off, with your kids, and that is smaller than if you had one on you and it was feeding and you didn't see it, how long could it remain attached before it would fall off? Like approximately, do you have any idea?
If you didn't see it and it just fed there, over a week. Yeah, they can feed for quite a while. Well, she was asking how long a tick can remain on you feeding away undetected before they'll just naturally fall off. But it can be quite a time. It can be a week, 10 days.
And secondly, like yourself, after you were diagnosed and received treatment, have you overcome all the symptoms in Lyme?
I'm pretty good. I'm also 20 years older than I was then. So, I've got the typical aches and pains, but I do have some remnants. I've got more body stiffness right from that age on than most of people in my peer group of that age. So, yeah, I do have some, but for the most part, and the most important thing to me is I got my brain back. And yes?
In this community, there's an issue with urban deer.
Yes.
Is that something that gardeners should be particularly concerned about, if there are deer coming through their forest?
Definitely. Controlling deer, any of the because ticks like deer, but they also like mice, and they like squirrels and chipmunks and all of that. So just controlling deer may not be the be-all, end-all. There's also a program in the United States called the four-post feeder, where they put these out in nature in areas of high deer populations, and these posts, the deer have to stick their head through these rollers to get at feed, and these rollers are coated with insecticides that kill the tick. And so in really concentrated areas, it's shown to be effective. I don't know about areas that are less concentrated, but in areas of high concentration, they have lowered the tick population. Yes?
How does that affect the family?
Well, family pets are a big deal, yeah. Dogs can get sick too. And so, you know, you've got to be checking your pets. Cats are a little more hardy, but cats can get sick from it. Well, I know, it's hard, very hard to find them on the pets. But usually in the groin area, in the ears, under the armpits of the dogs and cats, areas where there's less fur. The longer the tick feeds with Lyme disease, the more likelihood that you're going to become infected if that tick is infected. Not all deer tick carry Lyme disease. The infection rates vary from location to location, and it depends on how long they've been there, how well entrenched Lyme disease is in the rodent population in that area. There's a lot of factors that go into the tick infection rates, so they're not all the same. Even from kilometer to kilometer, the tick infection rates can vary. Yes?
I grew up thinking, we had a great health system in Canada, and we do. But in 2009, in August, bit by a tick, got Lyme disease. Up until 2 months ago, I got my first antibiotics. And my question is, how do we change the system? Because what I'm getting at is, if there was a system put in place for Lyme disease, recognition and so forth, well then in 2009 when I got bit and I started having signs and symptoms, that would have just been treated right there. I wouldn't be with a life that's completely ruined, with a chance for recovery, because there are chances.
There are, yeah.
I haven't responded to the antibiotics, now I've been taken off of them, and I'm just clawing at any opportunity that I see, spending tons of money, taking my entire community down with me because they don't know what to do, because they don't know who to talk to or what to do about it, and especially a patient who's trying to do the most about it is even less energy to deal with it. So
exactly.
What do we do? Like if this whole room was full of Lyme disease people and you were the Minister of Health of Canada, what could we say?
I would go, as a Minister of Health, I would go over to Europe and tour some of their Lyme treatment facilities that they have over there. They have entire facilities dedicated to treating Lyme disease. And I would go over there and I would tour them and I would bring that information back to Canada and I would immediately set one up. And immediately that takes the stigma away because it's accepted that Lyme disease is an issue. In a lot of Europe, Lyme disease is occurring several-fold that of AIDS. And we suspect in several areas of North America, it's now occurring several-fold that of AIDS. And it's only spreading. So it's something that we all have to be concerned about. And I see a lot of people here are my age too and probably have grandchildren. So it's stuff that we can take home to our families and help educate them too.
Yeah, and I just want to, if I could just end with, it's not just the disease, because I went to many specialists and it's humiliating, but I want to share this to really impact everybody. I was prescribed with a delusional psychotic condition, I was prescribed strong antipsychotic medication that has a lot of negative effects, which I experienced, which changed me, changed my neurobiology, and I can never get that back. And so all this time, I knew something was wrong with me. Nobody could advocate for me because I didn't know who to talk to. My family didn't know what to do about this. And they started wondering if this was all in my head. So
we get a lot of that. I usually get 1 or 2 calls a week from people who are actually in institutions, in the psych units of hospitals and whatnot, desperately reaching out, trying to get help because they know that what they have is not just as simple as you're going through a psychosis. They've got everything else that comes with it. They've got the poor nerve function, the weakness, the pain, the everything else. But yet they're stuffed in a psychiatric unit somewhere and can't get any help. And that's the incredible sadness about this is doctors from one end of Canada to the other are still saying, we don't have Lyme, Lyme is too rare, or it's no big deal, it's easily treated with 10 days of antibiotics. All of that information is terribly wrong, and they are just so poorly informed in this country. But we're trying to, with all of this, and an awareness, and on May 17th, May is Lyme Awareness Month in North America. On May 17th, I'll be flying to Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is going to be lit green on May 17th for Lyme awareness. The International Bridge in Niagara is going to be lit green for awareness. Yes?
Is Lyme disease only going to take place or going to be animal people or people, anything like that?
The only known case of people to people is mother to fetus through the placenta. It's been purported that it's from breast milk can do it, but yet that hasn't been shown. Sexual transmission hasn't been shown, and being the type of bacteria it is, it probably will never be a big sexually transmitted disease because the bacteria is anaerobic. It does not like areas of high oxygen. Our bodily fluids are the most oxygenated areas of the body. So it's not likely that it's ever going to become a big sexual disease, unlike its distant cousin, syphilis, who is a spirochete, but it thrives in areas of high oxygen. Yes?
I just wanted to mention that there's a documentary available online called Under Our Skin.
Good point.
And that's how I first discovered that my fibromyalgia was not fibro, but backbone disease.
Yes. Actually, if you go to the front page of the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation's website, CanLyme, just within the first few lines, there's a link to where you can just click on it and get the information on this documentary called Under Our Skin. It's a fabulous documentary. I recommend everybody get themselves a copy and have a look. Yes?
Can Lyme disease kill, and how long could you live with Lyme disease?
Lyme disease can kill. And there's been a number of reported cases and a number of Canadians who have passed from Lyme disease. And it kills in a number of ways. The most common death from Lyme disease is suicide because they're not getting the proper treatment and the proper help. The next most frequent cause of death from Lyme disease is heart disease because it will go in and affect the heart, it affects the valves, affects the nervous communication system, which affects the heartbeat. In fact, my daughter, as a result of her Lyme disease, now has a permanent pacemaker. Yes? Blood transfusions, it hasn't been shown, and again, it goes back to if the person gave blood early in their infection, there's certainly a possibility because it has been shown it can survive in the blood for up to 48 months. So it's certainly possible, but there just hasn't been a lot of it Another, though, while you're talking about that, there has been the other co-infections. Anaplasmosis can come from the ticks, which is the rickettsias, and another one, babesiosis, which is a disease similar to malaria. You can get that from these ticks. And it has been shown, in fact, I think the first case in North America was in Ontario, where it was a transfusion-acquired case of babesiosis. So, and it can be a dangerous disease too. Yes?
Good question. How old is your daughter?
Pardon me?
How old is your daughter with the pacemaker?
How old is she now?
Yeah.
She's 29.
How old was she when she got the pacemaker?
17. Or no, when she got the pacemaker, she was 20.
And has there ever been a case diagnosed, either through an autopsy or whatever, where someone had Lyme disease, had symptoms, and then through the state of whatever, through their life, cured themselves, or their body just fought it off, and there were signs of it? Can someone carry Lyme disease, and then, unbeknownst to them, their symptoms they experience just go away, and their body successfully fought off the infection?
Well, there's all kinds of scenarios, because we already know that there's a percentage of the population who are walking around with Lyme infections who don't have any symptoms. So depending on the strain, the species, the strength of the immune system, what you might have eaten, I don't know. We don't know that because there's hardly any research being done. And this is why we're wanting to get this research program done in Canada. And I'm hoping over the next few years, but it's certainly not going to happen quick or overnight, but I'm on the community advisory panel for the complex chronic disease program that's just being started at the BC Women's Hospital. And we have great hopes, but our hopes, like everything with this, have to be extended down the road, because there's a lot of education that has to be done first within the people that are involved with that clinic. And Lyme disease is only one of the several illnesses that is going to be explored at that clinic. But as a result of that, we hope to get some research going in BC as well, and some clinical studies, but that's going to be coming down the road. Yes? Yes, and Elizabeth May had her first reading of a National Lyme Strategy Bill, Bill C-442. That was tabled in June, I think, of last year. So that's the first reading. Second reading is on a draw basis, and I think Elizabeth drew 110 or something. So second reading probably won't even come this year. But having said that, we have some pretty good, our biggest fear was that the Conservatives, with their majority, would take it en masse to reject this bill. I found out a couple of weeks ago that in fact the opposite is the case. So now we have all party support for this bill. And so I think it will pass. And what we're hoping is, and Elizabeth May has offered this to the federal government, is that if they want to take her private member's bill and turn it into their government bill, that will greatly speed things up. So she's made that offer. So we're going to see where it goes. But it's a national strategy. It will give us, the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation and other groups, a voice. It forces their hand into bringing us into the end of the process to a certain degree. There's only so much private members' bills can ask for and get, but we're hoping that with that door opening and the support of government, that things are going to expand from there. Yes? Oh, right, yes, and sign the petition, the Elizabeth May's petition for the bill, which is on the table there. Yes?
How long is the season? How long is it for a stay?
Well, like I said, we found that tick on that dog on January 3rd, and temperatures hadn't been above -4 for quite a number of days preceding that. So it's a 12-month-a-year threat in British Columbia, especially southern areas, not so much as you get into the more northern and colder temperatures, but definitely from March right through to December. Pretty well all of southern BC is potentially, I mean, they're obviously not out as frequently. The two big peaks, there's a spring peak from April to around the end of June, and then there's another peak from September to the end of November. Yes?
Are ticks active at night also?
Ticks,
or just in the daytime?
Mostly in the daytime, and so it's mostly, but there's never no time that you're really safe from a tick because they'll crawl on you at night if you're out sleeping in a sleeping bag or something. So, and the other thing is for if you know anybody who's a hunter or who gathers wood every year for their thing, sitting on old deadfall on stumps and gathering wood is a real high-risk activity for catching ticks. So it's now that they're becoming more and more prevalent and more of these ticks are carrying disease, that information is more important too. Also, I wanted to mention, I started to get at this a little earlier, that Dr. Judith McCloskey, when she was on my board, when I started CanLyme and I found her, the reason that really triggered my interest in Dr. Judith McCloskey is she was working at the Kinsman Neurological Research Institute at UBC, but she had already published papers on the relationship between this spirochetal bacteria and Alzheimer's disease. She found an inordinately high number of Alzheimer's brains that she secured from the Alzheimer's brain banks were actually DNA positive for the Lyme bacteria. Then she took that research further and she took healthy brain tissue in a petri dish and introduced the Lyme bacteria to it to see if it would create the bloom of these deadly amyloid plaques that destroy the brain tissue in Alzheimer's disease. And sure enough, after 2 weeks, she had a full bloom of these amyloid plaques. So she then, just last year, published another paper indicating that her further research has indicated it's not just the Lyme bacteria. So of her research, she was showing that 90% of Alzheimer's brain harbor spirochetes, these spirochetal bacteria. 25% of all those brains are in fact the Lyme Borrelia. The other spirochetal bacteria are syphilis bacteria, the syphilis spirochete, the periodontal spirochete. So gum disease is in many cases a spirochetal infection, and it was always thought that those infections remained localized and didn't really show up in other parts of the bodies, but she's finding them in all the brains of the Alzheimer's patients. And also there's a gut spirochete that you can get too, and that's now being found in the Alzheimer's brains. But if you can imagine with the numbers, huge numbers of Alzheimer's patients we have just in Canada, if 25% of those or 20% of those are Lyme disease, and we have, as you saw on that graph that was there, almost no Lyme disease being diagnosed in Canada, that perhaps accounts for why, and Alzheimer's is thrown into that 2 million people of these diseases of unknown origin, as is Lou Gehrig's disease. And a number of people who were given a diagnosis of Lou Gehrig's disease, albeit the number is very low, but some of those cases are in fact treatable Lyme disease, and the person gets treated and it's no longer the death sentence. So, yes?
I was wondering, with your daughter, were you ever, like,
being in your position, are you ever able to get the Canadian doctors to recognize that your daughter does have Lyme disease?
Well, this was in 2001, and so even GPs have more latitude than to prescribe intravenous antibiotics. And because hers had affected her heart so quickly, her GP was able to put her on intravenous antibiotics immediately. However, once the local infectious disease doctor in Kelowna found out that she had received a prescription for 3 months of intravenous antibiotics, he tried to intervene, and he actually cut her off at 30 days. This is a girl he had never seen in his practice. Any other GP that would do that and be interfering with medical treatment of a patient, having never seen them, they'd have their license pulled in no time. But these infectious disease doctors are doing this all the time across Canada. And so he tried to cut her off, and actually did cut her off for a day, until I went into the administration of the hospital there and went up one side of him and down the other, and had the names of my lawyers ready to give to them. And so immediately the antibiotic was reinstated. Is there? No. There's been several lawyers look at the class action lawsuits. To date, none of them. It's just too expensive an undertaking, and there's no experts in Canada. Where are they going to get their expertise? So it's difficult, but there are some now looking at it from a different direction, because it's been so methodically suppressed by the medical leadership in Canada that they think they can now make perhaps a case under the Charter of Rights, security of person, that sort of thing. So there's a number of things being looked at. Yes?
I'm just interested in the antibiotic treatment. Is it a set pattern, 7 to 10 days, or you mentioned 3 months in the case of...
No, it's all over the map.
So it depends on the response to the treatment.
It does. It does. I was on and off antibiotics for a number of years. And my problem was, as I got feeling really good on the antibiotic, but as soon as I stopped, I relapsed. I was just as though I'd never had a day of antibiotics in my life. This went on for a period of 8 years until I found a combination of antibiotics that worked for me, but that won't necessarily work for you or anybody else. So in my case, it was clarithromycin with amoxicillin, both at higher than usual doses, and the difference was night and day for me as to how much more effective. No, this was by a family doctor. Yes, that Dr. Kindry who passed away.
They can give you lots of antibiotics.
Not too bad.
No diarrhea?
Pardon me?
No diarrhea?
In some people, most people no. In some, most people no. You got to remember, there's well over 100,000 people on any given day in North America on longer-term antibiotics for Lyme disease. And relatively speaking, very few side effects.
Any evidence of antibiotic resistance?
Nothing coming out yet at all. And in fact, there was a recent study, as you know, teenagers for years have been prescribed long-term antibiotics for acne. Well, they just completed a study that was published last year, I believe, on their findings with that, and there was absolutely no antibiotic resistance over the years from that either. Right. Yeah. So it's not as wicked a treatment as I think we are sometimes led to believe. And unfortunately, right now, it is the primary most effective treatment. There are things you can augment with naturally that are going to help your immune system, hopefully at some time take over the fight. I never say cured, but yet I'm not on antibiotics and I'm doing fine. But I don't know that it's not going to reoccur, because another thing that Dr. Judith McCloskey found in her research, and other scientists too, is that there is a cyst-like form that this bacteria can take, and it can reemerge later down the road. if your immune system drops for whatever reason. Typically, when that occurs, it's very easily retreated with a short 3-month period.
Does your immune system become less effective as you age?
It does, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get sick. We are a microbiome of trillions of bacteria and viruses. So we got a lot going on. So, you know, there's a lot of things there that could be, that don't necessarily just happen just because you age. And we just don't have the evidence of that to indicate that that's occurring right now. So, but with research, I mean, we've got a great deal of expertise now, and the type of research that we're going to do is going to be doing the deep tissue exploration of multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, various psychiatric disorders. Anybody who's going to go in this series of hospitals that we're working with in Ontario, anybody that's going to go in for a surgery that has any one of those diagnoses, and rather than have any of the tissue they go through during the surgery or anything they remove thrown into bio-waste, we want it. And so we're going to harvest these tissues, and Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation is buying the -80-degree freezers and whatnot to store the tissues in, and start using what we have here in knowledge and technology and genomics and proteomics, and start finding out what the patterns are of these bacteria and this whole microbiome that are causing these illnesses, and then we can devise treatments for them. Yes?
How are you funded?
Pardon me?
How are you funded?
All by the good help of people like yourselves. And we have some larger annual donors whose families have been affected by Lyme disease. But yes, it's mostly through the website, through people like yourself, anybody who wants to donate to a good cause. And I like to brag a bit, I think it's a cause that's actually going to have some quicker answers for a lot of these complex chronic diseases, because that type of research has certainly the ability, unlike anything before, to start turning some of these diseases of unknown origin into diseases of known origin. So that's where we're headed. We've been committed space in a brand new facility that'll be finished in 2015, and that's where it'll be housed. And before then, we've got our entire tissue collection protocol completed, and with the input of experts from around the world. And so we are ready to go. We're going to hopefully start getting some of our biobanks put in place and start at least creating the biobank and having the tissue, so when the facility is open, we can start looking at the tissue. And actually, even before the facility is open, we've actually just had tissue sent to a lab at UBC from post-mortem Lyme patient.